see you all here on this very special day to celebrate Dr. Ambedkar. And Dr. Ambedkar is really, really important to the Indian Buddhists who are part of Triratana in India. And we're going to hear more about that today, why we're going to be celebrating him and how important he is. In a few days' time, it's going to be the anniversary of his birthday. And in India, there'll be massive celebrations going on. It's Friday that they'll be celebrating that. So it's great that we're doing our own smaller, but equally excellent celebration here in Sheffield. So it's great to have Padmavajra here, and he's going to give us an introduction to Dr. Ambedkar and why we're connected with him, why he's so important to Buddhists and other people in India. Then we're going to, after Padmavajra's talk, we're going to have a short leg stretch, and then we're going to hear from some of the Sheffield Sangha who were on pilgrimage themselves very recently in India. And then after that, there's going to be a break for chai, and then we're going to come back and do a puja together. And we're going to finish, we hope, by about 4:30. However, people keep saying to me, do it Indian style. So that means we don't know what time we're going to do all these different things. We don't know what time we're going to finish. So we're just going to be relaxed about that. And also, you can all be really relaxed as well. There is going to be a fair bit of talking, but don't think if you want to get up and walk about, maybe not too much, but you can walk. Feel my British side coming out. But that in a very restrained way. But you can. You want to go out and go to the room or something. Please feel free to do that. It's not like the kind of normal one we have to sit very kind of quiet. It's you can be quite relaxed this afternoon and enjoy it. And what would be great though is at the very end, if people could help clear up. So after the puja, if there's anybody, can you put your hand up and you might be able to just do a bit of clearing up in the kitchen, and that's great. Thank you. That's really great. And what will happen is probably after the puja, we'll let people sit on. We'll go downstairs. And after about 10 minutes, somebody, perhaps even Maitrivasa, might say, let's go upstairs and clean up there. So, another thing I wanted to explain, Indian style, is occasionally people might say Jai Bhim, I guess, this afternoon, and just to explain what that is. So it's kind of a greeting that Ambedkarite Buddhists use in India. Bhim comes from the first name of Dr. Ambedkar, and Jai means victory, I think, so it's victory to Dr. Ambedkar. And people would just say Jai Bhim to each other. And also if they're given a talk or something, they quite often go Jai Bhim, and everybody goes Jai Bhim back. And I thought, yeah, we'd practice that. So, Jai Bhim! Jai Bhim! Yes, very good. We do it some more times. Jai Bhim! Jai Bhim! Jai Bhim! Jai Bhim! Perfect. Okay. So, it is really great to have Padmavajra here with his connections with India, which I'm going to say a little bit about after. And it's great to have you pilgrims here in your blue, fresh back from India and inspired. I wanted to thank a few of the people who have made things possible today. So there's a behind-the-scenes team that's met at 11:30, and that's Sue and Luke and Steph and T. So thank you very much. Then the shrine has been made by the pilgrims, though I'm not exactly sure who, including Nick and Sarah and many others, I think. If you feel like you need to be thanked, this is good. Really thanks to Maitrivasa, and again, does masses behind the scenes and is on tech today. So, before we carry on, we're going to do a very traditional thing, and we're going to ask a couple of people to come up and to garland the shrine. Well, first of all, to garland around Dr. Ambedkar, and then to put a garland around Sangharakshita, Sangharakshita. And in true style, I don't even know who those people are, so there's confusion. Great, so it's Sean and it's... So whoever would like to come up first? Sean, brilliant. So now I'm just going to briefly welcome and introduce Padmavajra very briefly. And it's really fantastic that he can be here with us today. Not only, as probably all of you know, is he the president of the centre, which means a friend. He's a really good friend to the centre. And having him here this last week, well, it shows the power of a good friend. Because when Padmavajra comes to visit us, it's like we all kind of, not that we're depressed, but we all cheer up. We just feel a lot happier and more relaxed. His friendship, his sunshine just comes out to us all. And he works really hard while he's here. He's visited a lot, he's seen a lot of people, led a lot of study groups, given a talk at Sangha night as well as a talk today. So it's fantastic, the work, the connection that you have with Sheffield. And I think us in Sheffield, we've really benefited over the years from Padmavajra's wisdom and positivity and his friendliness. And it's really great that he's here for this event celebrating Dr. Ambedkar. So Padmavajra went out to India right back in the early days to help set up and establish Triratana Buddhism in India. And he lived several years there and then visited yearly after that. So there's a big connection with India. And the best way that I can express that is I know when I was in India, when people realised that I'd met Padmavajra and I knew him, they'd go, wow, as if it was like knowing a celebrity. It's like you're a celebrity. It's like, we really appreciate you, but I guess because of like different culture, they just know how to show their love, you know, and people in India so appreciate Padmavajra. It was people just amazed that I knew him, that he was involved with Sheffield, and just so delighted to hear about it and so grateful for what Padmavajra had done in India. So it's just fantastic that you're here today with us. So I shall hand over to you.
Sisters and brothers in the Dhamma, Namo Buddhaya, Jai Bhim. Thank you very much, Satyajyoti, for that very lovely introduction. And, oh, well, do I have to do something? This is very Indian, actually. There should be lots of feedback, though. You know, it's what used to happen at big programs. So I won't do all that again. But anyway, it's very lovely to be celebrating Baba Saheb Ambedkar's Jayanti, as they call it in India, Ambedkar Jayanti. 14th of April is the Jayanti means something like victory, the victory of Ambedkar Day, his birthday. And I've celebrated many Ambedkar Jayantis, and they are extraordinary days. I've celebrated them in Bombay, Mumbai, as we must now call it, Nagpur, Pune, other places. And you wake up, or you're woken up very early in the morning with incredibly loud songs coming from loudspeakers, bad loudspeakers, you know, all over the city, singing Bhim Geet, as it's called, songs in praise of Dr. Ambedkar. And I would spend the day going from locality to locality, from place to place, giving talks on Dr. Ambedkar. Every single area would be celebrating Dr. Ambedkar's birthday. The shrines would be, you know, lit up in neon and, you know, with fairy lights, and, you know, the whole of, you know, the city would be completely transformed to celebrate this great leader, this great man who people in India regard as a bodhisattva, Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And it was very hot as well. April is a very hot month in India. So yes, it would be going from place to place to give talks. And I had to eat a lot as well, because as the honoured guest, that meant eating regularly throughout the day. So I'm delighted to be celebrating Dr. Ambedkar's birthday with you in Sheffield. I think Sheffield might be unique in having a day, dedicating a day to celebrating Dr. Ambedkar, because of these long-standing connections between our movement in India and the Sheffield Buddhist Centre, because of the different pilgrimages that have taken place from Sheffield, which I know have had a transforming effect on the people who've done those pilgrimages. And I must say that I want to get through my talk fairly quickly, because the best bit, I think, is going to be the pilgrimage stories. So I'll try to hurry along. But I want to celebrate Dr. Ambedkar. I have a huge debt of gratitude to Dr. Ambedkar. I think probably in many, many ways, one of the most formative periods of my life was living in India. Living within Indian Buddhist communities. I didn't go to India as a tourist. I haven't travelled much in India. I can tell you quite a bit about obscure sugar towns and railway towns of Maharashtra state, where I was based. But I've never been to the Taj Mahal. I've never done any of that. I was there living with a community, living as part of the community, the Indian Buddhist community. And I learnt so much living there, learnt much more than I taught, I would say, about the Dharma and living the Dhamma as a way of liberation, as a way of social liberation. I think my faith in Buddhism, my faith in the Dharma increased in India hugely because of Dr. Ambedkar and his followers, because I saw directly how living the Dharma life can lead to social change and how the transformation of consciousness can lead to a different kind of society. It's quite extraordinary to see that. And Dr. Ambedkar as well was a very, very hard-headed man, had to be. You know, he was born in 1891 in Mahal in Madhya Pradesh, central India, which is now called Dr. Ambedkar Nagar. It wasn't when I lived in India, but clearly, he's so important, they've changed the name of the town. His father was a cashier, I think, in the Indian Army. That is, the Indian Army run by the British, because, of course, this is all pre-independence times. And in some ways, he was a little bit shielded from the stigma of untouchability, living on a cantonment, living in, as it were, an army community. But he was born into the Mahar community. The Mahars traditionally are kind of village slaves, really. The Mahars' traditional occupation. They lived in a sort of separate part of the village with, in villages, the different communities would have their different places. They would live on bad land with bad water, and they basically had to just do the bidding of the higher castes. That was what they did and what they got was just, whatever they were given by the higher castes. And they had a right to dead animals, dead cows, buffaloes, and things like that. So extremely impoverished, and no right at all for any kind of higher life, higher education. But one of the benefits of the British, it has to be said, I know probably anathema in some areas say that, but the British weren't interested in caste particularly, actually. So there was a way, employment given by the British to outcast, so-called outcast communities. And yes, Dr. Ambedkar's father was a cashier in the army, and so that meant that Dr. Ambedkar had probably a better start than many, but nonetheless he was an untouchable. He died, by the way, let's get these facts, in New Delhi on the 6th of December 1956. So he didn't live very long. I was amazed. I was just sort of looking at that. I think, goodness, he achieved so much in those years. I mean, he achieved a staggering amount. And actually, when you read Dr. Ambedkar's life, you read about a life of total service, unbelievable giving, endlessly, seemingly. And as he got older, of course, with very, very bad health, just carrying on with the work. I can't give you an account of all of that. I'd recommend reading a couple of books. Jai Bin by Nagabodhi, Dispatches from a Peaceful Revolution, if you can get hold of it. But also Bante's book, Ambedkar in Buddhism. That's a very good introduction to Dr. Ambedkar and his relationship with Buddhism and with Triratna. But yes, seeing Dr. Ambedkar, this incredibly hard-headed man, this man who who worked in law, economics, trades unionism, education, politics, doing everything he could to liberate the backward classes, as they were called, what we call Dalits now, of all kinds of communities, and even getting to the staggering heights of being the first law minister of the government of India. He framed the constitution, he outlawed untouchability, he guided the constitution through the first Indian government. I mean, to see somebody like that realizing that actually the only way to bring about real change in a profoundly a hierarchical society, hierarchical in the worst sense, with its graded system of inequality, as he calls caste. Seeing somebody like that, realizing that the only way to bring about real change is, yes, you work on laws, you work on all those things, but you have to change consciousness. You have to change people's minds, because you can change all the laws in the world, but the discrimination goes on, as we know. But until you start changing consciousness, there's no guarantee of real change. And very, very early on, it's quite clear, long before the conversion, which happened in 1956, about 6 weeks before he died, it was very, very obvious that he was drawn to Buddhism. Very, very obvious indeed that was, what was attracting him. But it took a long time, I think, to get to that definitive point, I think. So, I mean, the fact that somebody like that, could see that the Dharma, living the Dharma, practicing the Dharma, communicating the Dharma, disseminating the Dharma, is going to be the way to guarantee real change, real social liberation. Well, that had a big effect on me. I think before then I'd thought that Buddhism, yes, of course, we gain enlightenment for all beings. We're on that kind of path. You do the metta-bhavana. But it was more, I think, my attraction was always, as it were, mystical and so on. But living in India, I began to see, no, it's far more far-reaching than that. There are far more implications. Of course, I'd learned that from Sangharakshita, from listening to his lectures, from studying with him, because he emphasized the transformation of society. Very, very strong theme in his teaching. But in India, I saw that happening in a very, very direct way, under very, very difficult conditions. I think a very important moment for me in my studies of Dr. Ambedkar was reading some of his own autobiographical accounts. There's a lovely little volume called Waiting for a Visa. Waiting for a Visa. And the visa he means is the entry visa to his own land. The entry visa to his own land, because as let's say an untouchable, he didn't have an entry into his own land. So he gives some stories of, what it's like to wait for a visa in your own country. And as I've said, he was, born, his father was, worked for the army and in a cantonment. And anyway, one day he and his sisters, they were very young, they were just children, had to go to, I think their father was in another part of Maharashtra state, and they had to travel on their own to get to see their father. And Dr. Ambedkar describes how excited he was. It was the first time going on a train, of course, a steam train, and how, his, the people he was staying with, the other family members, I think it was probably his mother, dressed them up in, English style shirts and shorts and so on. And, they had a few annas to, buy some soda pop or something like that. And, how wonderful it felt to be going on this journey. And the train pulled into the railway station. And the railway station they pulled into was about 10 miles from the village they were going to. And they got off the train, these children, and there was nobody there to meet them. A message hadn't got through to his father's family to meet these children. So everybody left the station. And there's these 3 children. You can really picture it, a hot, Indian railway station. And there they are, these 3 children in their best. And the station master walked up to them and the first question was, what is your caste? What is your caste? Not, you're lost, how can I help you? What do you need? What is your caste? And they said, well, we're Mahars. And he took several steps back for fear of pollution, ritual pollution. There's nothing wrong with these children. They're not diseased. They just belong to the wrong caste. I mean, that, you have to really, this is the sort of thing that Dr. Ambedkar encountered and what everybody encountered at that time. And he tells this story of, trying to arrange for bullock cart drivers to take them to their village. And, they end up traveling through the night, absolutely terrified, to their village, eventually getting there completely traumatized and upset. And this is where it all begins. It's in those experiences that the movement of uplift for this community begins. This is where Buddhism begins. The revival of Buddhism begins in these experiences. This is dukkha, isn't it? This is the dukkha of social discrimination. This is that pain. And it was quite vivid to me when I lived in India reading these accounts. Of course, Dr. Ambedkar describes his journey, how depressed he was as he grew up, as he started to get an education, and having to get an education again in the teeth of incredible discrimination. Not being able to take water from the same pot as his schoolmates and things like that. But he did do very well. He describes, either giving into sort of depression and anger and frustration, and a certain moment in childhood where he decided, no, I'm going to make something of myself. And he describes his sort of commitment to education. He really believed in education. I was saying to Shankar earlier, one of Dr. Ambedkar's great slogans is educate, agitate, organize. Wonderful saying. Education, you get ideas, if you like, to liberate you out of the ignorance you're in, and that stirs you up. It starts to change the way you see the world, but then you must organize, you must come together with others to change the world around you. And there were philanthropists in India. Yes, there was the help of the British education system in India, and also philanthropic Hindus, especially Hindu Maharajas. There was the famous Maharaja of Baroda, Gaikwad of Baroda, who used to sponsor Dalit boys. I think there were probably no girls, but he used to sponsor them and sponsor them to have an education in Britain. And Dr. Ambedkar studied, of course, at Gray's Inn. He studied law. So he came to this country. It's a whole episode. The house where he stayed in is owned now, I think, by the Indian government. And you can actually go there and, see where Dr. Ambedkar lived. And he came back to India, which, not everybody came back, because, obviously you could do well in this country if you were really bright and intelligent and you really wanted to make something of it. But Dr. Ambedkar went back because he was very, very committed early on, to the liberation of his community. And the first thing he did was get working in the government of the Maharaja of Baroda. So here is one of the most qualified young men in India, trying to work in the administrative system of this minor kingdom in Gujarat state, Baroda, part of Gujarat now. And he'd get no cooperation. The clerks, the peons would come to the door of his office and throw the files that he needed onto the desk or onto the floor. Again, he wasn't allowed to drink the water that everybody else was drinking. Couldn't find anywhere to stay, was even driven out of the place where he tried to stay. And it was just this constant discrimination. And it was so depressing, so upsetting. He worked so hard, and there's this, and wanting to serve, wanting to, do what, what was wanted of him, but just blocked at every turn. And he describes sitting in a park in Baroda. He knows he's waiting really to go and get the train back to Bombay. And he describes just feeling so upset, so sad, so sorrowful at this constant discrimination. And then he thought, but what about my brothers and sisters? They experience something far worse on a daily basis in every village in India, in every city, in every town. And he makes a kind of vow. It's almost like a bodhisattva vow. Even though I don't think he knew about bodhisattva's vows then, but from now on, he was going to work for the uplift and the liberation of the downtrodden, of the Dalits. There's a very, very moving account of that. So it's things like this. When I started to read these things, and living in India, I could imagine them, quite vividly. Really connected me, with this incredible man. And then there is, of course, his long journey to conversion. When you read Dr. Ambedkar's life story, it's a life of, continual activism. Really doing great things, to bring about change, in society. He was profoundly non-violent. He didn't agree. He thought, whatever change comes about must be done non-violently. He was very critical of Marxism, for that reason. He was quite scathing about Indian Marxists. He dismissed them all as a bunch of Brahmin boys. And he knew more about Marx than any of them did. And he probably did. I mean, he was, ferociously intellectual, incredible mind, knew many languages and studied so many fields, in so many fields. There was a very important ungiven speech. I think this was sometime in the 1930s. I'm a bit hazy about dates. He was asked to give a speech at the Jat-Pat Todat Mandal, a kind of reforming Hindu society, I think in Lahore, in the Punjab, now in Pakistan, of course. And of course, he had to submit his paper before it was given. And it was so strong that the organisers, they asked him to kind of modify things a bit, and he wouldn't. And they said, we can't go ahead with the conference. We're going to cancel the conference because what he was saying was incendiary. The title of this paper, this great ungiven paper, is Annihilation of Caste. If you want to have a sort of sense of Dr. Ambedkar's thinking and his method and his incredible intellect, read Annihilation of Caste. It's quite a short book, but it's really, really powerful. Really, really powerful. It does a complete deconstruction of the caste system and also how damaging it is to everybody in India, including the higher castes, and how it, the damages it does on so many different levels. And also, I believe in that piece, he kind of almost does a kind of shunyata, madhyamaka critique of caste. He said, it doesn't exist. It's a mental construction. It doesn't exist in reality. Human beings are not essentially in a caste. That's when he said that, I realized how powerful views are, mental constructions are, how they can become reality, but they are in minds. They're mind created, supported by, thousands of years of religious sanction. That's what you're up against with caste. It's much deeper than class, much, much deeper, because it's got this religious, mythic sanction. But he says it doesn't exist. It's shunyata. He doesn't use that word, but he might just have. But in this ungiven paper, he makes this explosive statement. Of course, this is the 30s. The British are kind of on the way out. And he says, although it was my misfortune to have been born a Hindu, I solemnly assure you, I will not die a Hindu. And that sent shockwaves throughout India. Because if Dr. Ambedkar left Hinduism and took another religion, what was that going to do? What was that going to do to the independence movement? Would he become a Muslim, for example? Would he become a Christian? The other major communities. And would he become a Sikh? And there were quite a few religious leaders who were courting Dr. Ambedkar at this time, even offering staggering sums of money for his conversion. Of course, he wasn't for sale. Really amazing kind of moment. He published Annihilation of Caste. It was very unfavorably reviewed by Gandhiji. And there was this correspondence between them, quite a ferocious correspondence. Dr. Ambedkar was very opposed to Gandhi. And our Buddhist friends in India, I know a lot of people in the West are very inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, but in India they're not. Most Dalit communities are not inspired by Gandhi. They're inspired by Dr. Ambedkar. That's a big story. I won't go into all that, but it's just a bit of information. But yes, so it was a very, you can imagine how explosive this was, how bold it was to stand up in this way, for his community, for him, for liberation. And I'm also going to mention something about, or even read a bit, because I think it's good that we actually hear from Dr. Ambedkar about his vision of a different kind of society, which does flow into his understanding of Buddhism. So he says, I would not be surprised if some of you have grown weary listening to this tiresome tale of the sad effects which caste has produced. There is nothing new in it. I will therefore turn to the constructive side of the problem. What is your ideal society if you do not want caste? Is a question that is bound to be asked of you. If you ask me, my ideal would be a society based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. And why not? It's interesting, he starts by talking about fraternity. He reverses the order, I think for very practical reasons. What objection can there be to fraternity? I cannot imagine any. An ideal society should be mobile, should be full of channels for conveying a change taking place in one part to other parts. In an ideal society, there should be many interests, channels for conveying a change taking place in one part to other parts. In an ideal society, there should be many interests consciously communicated and shared. There should be varied and free points of contact with other modes of association. In other words, there must be social endosmosis. I looked up endosmosis. It's something to do with the permeability of water cells. I think any scientist here, you might correct me, but the general idea is this sort of flow, this transparency between all the different elements of society. This is fraternity, which is only another name for democracy. Democracy is not merely a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards one's fellow human beings. An incredible definition of democracy, isn't it? Which is fraternity. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards one's fellow men, one's fellow human beings. This is, in a way, the whole basis of Dr. Ambedkar's social thinking. In later years, he describes this as Dhamma. In later years, in his book, The Buddha and His Dhamma, a very famous book, he says, Dhamma is morality, morality is Dhamma. And what is morality? It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards one's fellow human beings. He goes even further in The Buddha and His Dhamma. He says, this morality, which is Dhamma, which is the truth, this is sacred and universal. It's the most holy thing. It's more sacred even than the wonderful pilgrimage places, this attitude of respect and reverence towards one's fellow human beings. It's sacred. It's the most holy thing that you can do. And it's universal. It's for everybody on all occasions. This is his vision of democracy. This is his vision of fraternity. And this flow between all areas of society. You can see how anti-caste it is, can't you? You know, in caste, with the caste system, it's sort of discrete elements of society arranged hierarchically. He's saying, no, that's a very, very unhealthy society. But an ideal society has this flow of communication, this, conjoint communicated experience flowing between one another. And of course, this is where the Buddhist Sangha needs to be a seed of such a society. The Buddhist spiritual community should have that kind of quality, not just for the people within it, but for the benefit of everybody. The Buddhist center should be a kind of focus, for a complete flow, regardless of someone's background or experience or age or color or class, or whatever it might be. All of that is irrelevant, really, as you come into this kind of communication. There's a Marathi word that Dr. Ambedkar used in his speeches, which I'm very, very fond of, which is very hard to translate, impossible, really, to translate into English. The word is manuski. And it means something like human beingness. And it's a kind of anti-caste word. If you say that there's manuski, you're saying you do not see caste in a person. It's very hard for us to appreciate that because, by and large, maybe we do have our little pockets of prejudice and conditioning and so on. But by and large, we have learned to appreciate another human being as another human being first and foremost. I hope we're like that. In India, it's not like that. I mean, I'm not going to generalize, but I have had the experience traveling, particularly with Buddhist friends of mine. I remember one time when I was traveling with an order member named Bodhisen, who used to interpret for me and was a very close friend, incredibly active, positive, cheerful order member from a very, very poor village, very, very poor background, and absolutely outstanding human being, absolutely outstanding order member. And we were on this long train journey in this compartment. Of course, in India, people like to immediately get into rapport and lovely things about India. They want to know all about you. And they weren't so interested in me at first, which is unusual. But they were very interested in Bodhisen, but they were interested for a particular reason. So I said, what is your name? He said, Bodhisen. That's your family name? Is your Bodhisen? Dharmachari Bodhisen. But was that your given name? Dharmachari Bodhisen. He just kept saying it because you can often tell somebody's caste by their surname. You can often pigeonhole them. And Bodhisattva wasn't going to say what that was, because he was Bodhisattva. He was a Dharmacharya. What village do you come from? Which area do you come from in Maharashtra? What work do you do? It went on. They were trying to work out his caste. I could sort of see it going on, and Bodhisattva was just not having any of it. He was just smiling, being very courteous, very friendly. And in the end, they gave up, and they just talked to one another. But Manuski, there is no interest in caste, no interest whatsoever. You see the human being, you respect and revere the human being above all else. It's very, very close to this idea that you get, that the Buddha uses this phrase, Bahujan Hitai, Bahujan Sakai, go and teach the Dharma for the happiness and the welfare of the Bahujan, the many people. And that doesn't mean just lots of people. Again, Bahujan is a kind of anti-caste term, if you like, the people. It's for the people. It's for the human beings. This is what the Dharma is for. I won't dwell so much on what he says about liberty, but he does talk about liberty as not just simply being free, to work and earn and to live your life, but it's the liberty to develop. It's the liberty to develop as a human being. This is, so crucial. Again, there's this sort of sense of there's something so crushing about caste, about any kind of discrimination like that, when people are not allowed to develop their humanness. They're not allowed to get education. I mean, the punishments, the traditional punishments, for outcasts, for Dalits, if they happened, for example, to overhear the sacred Hindu scriptures, well, the punishments, well, I don't bear, mentioning, really harsh, so that they're kept out of education. So they're in a state of continual bondage, slavery. And Dr. Ambedkar warned at various times. He's a very, very outspoken speaker. He warned the caste Hindus of India. He said, you are creating a powder keg by denying people their liberty to develop themselves. That is going to turn into a rage. That is going to explode. Don't we know it? If you push people down, continually, that positive desire to grow and to change and to develop, it's not going to go quietly. The human will to develop doesn't just disappear. It turns into something else. And again, don't we know it? In a way, from our experience, maybe, perhaps, when you came in contact with the Dharma, even though you had the benefit of a good education, a good job, good family, and so on and so forth, that feeling that you weren't making the most of yourself in other ways, that desire to live a higher life through practicing the Dharma. If that's, Sangharakshita says somewhere that if that's blocked, that desire to evolve, for whatever reason, external or internal, it creates, he says it creates criminality. It becomes destructive. It's not going to go away. A fascinating sort of insight into the evolutionary urge, if you like. So that's liberty. Interestingly enough, in talking about equality, Dr. Ambedkar said, well, this is the most contested of this slogan from the French Revolution. And Dr. Ambedkar said, well, manifestly, human beings are not equal. And he knew that because he definitely wasn't equal to other people. He was outstanding and so on. And, he says, when you look at things, there's so much inequality, from all sorts of point of view. However, for all practical purposes, whoever runs or whoever administers the ideal society must treat everybody as equal in the sense of equality of opportunity. There must be equality of the means to liberation, the means for social contact and so on. So it's a practical thing. He's not interested in the metaphysic of it. It's the practicalities of people having access, to what they need. So equality in that sense. I mean, later on in life, he wrote a famous, very hard-hitting article called "The Buddha and the Future of His Religion." This was a couple of years before the Great Conversion ceremony, where you could see that he was thinking more and more deeply about Buddhism and definitely moving in that direction. He, in talking about the Buddha and the future of his religion and why Buddhism was so important, was because of the Buddha's social teaching. And he goes through what is required of religion now. Well, first of all, it must be that the leader of such a religion can't be treated as a god or a prophet or a son of God, because for Dr. Ambedkar there is no God, no creator. And he makes this distinction between a moksha datta and a marga datta. So the Buddha is not a moksha datta. He doesn't give salvation. He's a marga datta. He points the way, and you have to follow that way. But he also said that the Buddha taught liberty, equality, fraternity. He learned liberty, equality, and fraternity, not from the French Revolution, but from his master, the Buddha. So he definitely had this much deeper spiritual vision, if you like, of liberty, equality, fraternity. You can hear that, I think, in that definition of fraternity. So yes, in the end, Dr. Ambedkar made this great announcement that he was going to convert to Buddhism. He was going to leave Hinduism. So this was in 1956, and the Great Conversion ceremony happened on the 6th of December, 1956. It was an extraordinarily bold thing to do, for this community. And of course, it's just after independence, and there was so much opposition. The vast majority of Dr. Ambedkar's followers were absolutely delighted and inspired that their leader could take such a bold step. But there were people amongst his followers who were more politically inclined, who tried to prevent the conversion because they said it would make things, they wouldn't get the various reservations that had been agreed to in the if you like, the benefits of the laws of positive discrimination in the Congress government. This is, again, one of the things that is worth thinking about. When Dr. Ambedkar decided to convert, all of the advantages that he'd brought about through framing the Indian Constitution, Jawaharlal Nehru and the then Congress government said, well, you can't have those benefits anymore. If you're going to leave Hinduism, you can't have those benefits if you're going to be Buddhist, even though there's no material change whatsoever. So no longer any reserved seats for people who regard themselves as Buddhists in the local government, in central government, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very threatening. And Dr. Ambedkar was very distressed that some of his people could think that the conversion movement was for material gain. And then he gave a very, very stirring speech after the conversion. And this was tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, I think, in Nagpur. A very, very stirring speech indeed. And he said, I'll fight, I'm going to fight, for our material rights, that we can deal with that. That's not a problem, which, were, given to them in the end. But he said, we haven't started this movement for material gain. We've started it for our dignity and self-respect. That's why we're Buddhists. We're doing it for our dignity and self-respect. When you leave Hinduism, where there's been so much oppression, so much depression, so many damaging, not just social and political damage, but psychological damage, So much depression and resentment, so much disempowerment, so much passivity. I mean, Dr. Ambedkar could be, some of his speeches I've seen translated from Marathi, given to his own followers are really tough. Really, really tough. He says, you've got to look at yourselves. You've got to look at yourselves. You have to realize that in this society, high caste Hindus treat animals better than they treat you. Really hard hitting. So we've started this movement for our dignity and self-respect, not for material gain. When you enter Buddhism, you will breathe in an atmosphere of freedom. You'll breathe in an atmosphere where you will reap the consequences of your positive actions. That's what he said, and it's incredible because it wasn't as if in converting to Buddhism he was entering an incredibly kind of wealthy Buddhist world. Buddhism had been shrinking in Asia. In fact, there were Buddhists, traditional Buddhists from Southeast Asia, I think, who were opposed to the conversion. There were Buddhists, unfortunately, caught up with Hindu nationalism and things like that. There was that kind of opposition. So it's an incredible leap of faith. And you might sort of wonder, well, what's this man doing? But then you'd also have to talk to the people who were on there at that time of conversion. And I knew people who were there in the early days of conversion. And I asked them, fortunately, I went to India when some of them were still alive. And I asked them, well, what was it like? What was it like on that day? How did you feel when you took the refuges and precepts from Dr. Ambedkar? How did it feel when you took what's known as the 22 vows? These vows he formulated to fully renounce Hindu practices and fully go for refuge to the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. And they said, well, in some ways it made life more difficult for us because, in our village, the local shopkeepers boycotted us. People would say, who's told you can convert? Who's told you can leave Hinduism? How dare you? And for a while, our life was more materially difficult. I said, oh, that must have been really hard. They said, no, because we felt free. There's this incredible feeling of freedom, of liberation. We didn't even know what Buddhism was. Not then. Not then. We just knew that Dr. Ambedkar knew. He was our bodhisattva. He was our leader. We just knew that. And we felt this wonderful liberation and this sense of dignity and self-respect. And, talking to them, there'd be tears in their eyes when they tell the story of going to the Great Conversion and, or other conversions that happened around that time. Very, very moving, very inspiring. In his conversion speech, Dr. Ambedkar talks a lot about energy, enthusiasm, inspiration, utsaha in Marathi. It's the same in Sanskrit when Shantideva is talking about virya. He's talking about utsaha. It's a lovely word. It says it all, doesn't it, in the sound. And he says, a human being must feel inspired, must feel enthusiastic. If there isn't inspiration, if there isn't enthusiasm, it means your body and mind are sick. This religion we've been in has made us sick because it's stopped us feeling any kind of inspiration or enthusiasm. Coming into Buddhism, we feel that inspiration and enthusiasm. He felt it profoundly, deeply. And, I used to see this among friends in India, who, when we started to teach in India, people coming to us, I remember it particularly in Bombay, which is a pretty rough city to live in, I can assure you. It was in my day anyway. And, people coming along to us who were already Buddhists, or maybe not Buddhists, they'd been born in a Buddhist family, but they hadn't encountered Buddhism as a spiritual practice. And even though they were poor, in very, very difficult soul-destroying jobs in some ways, having to travel a long way to work on the Bombay local or the bus system. They found in coming to the Dharma this sense of freedom, this sense of dignity and self-respect. And it moved me so much repeatedly, to see people in very, very difficult circumstances who, taking up a practice like regular meditation, observing the precepts more diligently, Dharma study, puja, that kind of thing, and just simply sharing what they'd discovered with other people, seeing them change, seeing them just, flower in confidence and strength. It made me realize the Dharma really has so much to offer. People in all walks of life in the West, people sometimes say, oh, it's just the middle classes that come to Buddhism, the people who've been to university and that sort of thing. I mean, I'm from a working class family and I was thrown out of school at 16. Thank goodness for the Dharma. Thank goodness, because it's given me an education, it's changed my life. It is for everybody. It really is. And we just have to have the imagination, to connect it, to connect the Dharma with everybody, whatever their background. So yes, I'm very inspired by Dr. Ambedkar and incredibly grateful to Sangharakshita, to Bhante. You might have known that 6 weeks after the conversion, Dr. Ambedkar died. And he was so ill. I mean, he had so much wrong with him. He'd given everything. But he had made contact with Bhante, with Sangharakshita. They'd had a few meetings. And in fact, he asked Sangharakshita to convert him to Buddhism. And Bhante said, well, no, it's better if it's the senior most monk in India who does that. And they did have various interactions, and Dr. Ambedkar, invited Bhante to give lectures and so on. And of course, the famous story of Bhante being in Nagpur, where the great conversion movement started, the great heartland of Buddhism in contemporary India. The news came that Dr. Ambedkar died, and this was devastating for that Buddhist community. And, Bhante had to step in and give so many lectures and see so many people, communicate with so many to keep the movement alive. And he made this very, very strong bond and connection with Buddhists in India, with that community, and used to travel among them and, live alongside them and teach them. He'd come out of Kalimpong up in the hills every winter and do lots of touring in Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat and up in Delhi and so on, to bring the Dharma to this community. And then when the time was right, he suggested that some of us went out and did it. Well, we were invited to come out and teach among Sangharakshita's disciples. That's a whole other story. And I feel enormously privileged to have been involved in that. And I saw Sangharakshita teaching in India on one of his return visits. It was amazing. I'd seen Bhante Sangharakshita teaching in London, teaching at Padmavajra, where I live now, teaching in the West. And I saw him teaching in India, and it was the same man. It was no big deal, him coming to India. It was the same man seamlessly moving into communicating with Indian Buddhists, really bringing the Dharma into their immediate concerns, into their particular situation. And I could see why people had such a deep feeling for him, such a deep connection with him, because he just, he knew what this all meant. He knew what the Dharma meant to them. He knew what Dr. Ambedkar meant to them. He knew how they suffered. He'd seen it. He'd seen the suffering of Dalit people. He knew what the Dharma could do for that community. And yes, I was very lucky, to have tagged on to an order member named Lokamitra, who started our movement in India, and to have seen that firsthand. I'm going to end by reading you a poem, if I can find it. one of the things about Dr. Ambedkar's, what he did with the Great Conversion movement, of course, it starts off a whole process of transformation, of, you know, yes, of social and even political change, but also cultural change and religious change, obviously. And there was a whole movement, and it's probably still going on, of Dalit poets. There was a famous sort of group called the Dalit Panthers who kind of based themselves on the Black Panthers. They were mostly a literary movement, it has to be said, but they kind of had quite a big effect on certainly Marathi literature because it was quite sort of explosive poetry. And I don't know what the sort of state of sort of Dalit culture is at the moment in terms of, but there is I'm pretty sure there's a sort of rising of a new kind of sensibility. But there's one particular poem, apparently it's very beautiful in Marathi, by a poet named Daya Pawar. And it's called The Buddha. And I think it gives you a different insight into the Buddha. We all perhaps make the Buddha in our own image, the Buddha we want. Well, this is what the Buddha is like for a Dalit Buddhist, a follower of Dr. Ambedkar. It's simply called the Buddha. I never see you in Jeta's garden, sitting with your eyes closed, meditating in the lotus position, or in the Ajanta and Ellora caves with your stone lips sewn shut, sleeping the last sleep of your life. I only see you walking, talking, breathing gently, healingly, on the sorrows of the poor and the weak, going from hut to hut in the life-destroying darkness with a torch in your hand, giving their suffering, which drains their blood like a contagious disease, a whole new meaning. Thank you.
I really feel a real strong sense of... Okay, so, well, it's a great pleasure to hand over to the pilgrims. So, Maitre Dasa, who many of us know, has organised, I think, 4 or 5? Is it 4 pilgrimages? A large number of pilgrimages, starting, I think, 4. Okay. And really, we owe Maitre Dasa a big amount of gratitude. Yeah, because it's a huge job to get these pilgrimages together. He goes over months before and then often goes on the travels to kind of explore where he's going to take the pilgrims, where he sleeps in the railway stations, which is the bit that does my head in. Anyway, and also kind of save money, I think. Anyway, so, you know, he him and a team of people, and I've been on 2 pilgrimages. Many people here have been on them. They are transformative, life-changing, and one of the most wonderful things is the team that you meet on the pilgrimages, the people from India, Maitre Dasa's friends, who become our friends as well. Anyway, I'm not going to say it to my friends. So let me hand over to Edward, who is going to introduce the next session. A number of people are going to speak. I don't think I'm going to say who they are because I'm sure that Edward can explain what's going to happen next. Thank you.
So I don't have much more to add, other than again to rejoice in Maitre Dasa. It's thanks to him and his friendships, his personal connection in India, that we have our own Sheffield Sangha pilgrimage. So early in February, just a couple of months ago, I think nearly 20 of us from Sheffield went out under his watchful and compassionate care and did our pilgrimage, visiting the sacred sites of the Buddha and following in the Buddha's footsteps, seeing how Sangharakshita again learned so much and experienced so much of Buddhism in India, and an opportunity for us to meet with the new Buddhists, the Triratana Sangha in India as well. So getting in contact with the vast ocean of Buddhism for ourselves. So I'll hand over to a few of the pilgrims are here today. You'll recognize us with our blue shirts. And hopefully just to share a flavor, perhaps, of this experience of following in the footsteps of the Buddha. So I'll hand over first to Dawn, and then we'll also hear from Robin, Sian, Phoebe, and then I have some more things to say at the end. Great.
Thank you, Edward. So to start with, I guess, will be, why did I go on a pilgrimage? So for me, it was the reasons to learn more about the Buddha, to have a deeper understanding of Buddhism and to have connection with the site. So we hear so many stories on Sangha night, and to be able to picture that, I'm thinking that would be fantastic. What I didn't expect to get from it was a massive appreciation of the Sangha. So traveling with people that you become so close to and you care so much about, you become traveling as a family. And that's an amazing experience. So if any of you get the opportunity to go on a Sangha, I very much recommend it. On a pilgrimage, I recommend it. And also Dr. Ambedkar. So I knew about Dr. Ambedkar and the history of it, and I'd had a talk on a retreat that I went on before, and it was great. But to see it in India in practice and see the connection of the people and just how important it is on a day-to-day basis, not just a history lesson, it was just, amazing. So starting off is the Buddha's history, so the footsteps of the Buddha, which was Dr. Ambedkar's inspiration. So that'll be my part. I'll hand over to Sian to talk more about the more recent developments with Ambedkar and current Buddhism. So also from a historical point of view, the Buddha, when he died, said he wanted his followers to visit 4 places that were associated with his life. So Lumbini, where he was born, Bodh Gaya, where he was enlightened, Sarnath, where he preached his first sermon, and Krishnagar, which was his parinirvana, so where he passed away. So I'm going to tackle this chronologically from the point of view of the Buddha, not the way that we travelled it. So we did reach a point where the Buddha actually went forth. We couldn't make it into Lumbini because it's in Nepal, so that would have been a bit of a nightmare for us at that time. So we joined him, a little cringe from Phoebe, she might touch on that in her talk. So we hit the point where he went forth. So it was the time where he cut off his long hair, he gave away his wonderful robes to his attendant to take back to the palace, and he went forth on his journey. We got to that point by walking through the fields, so the farmers' fields that may have looked very much like they did at the time. And that was quite a good connection, actually, to be walking the path that the Buddha perhaps would have walked himself, not in the hustle and bustle of the cities which we'd left behind, or in the big sort of touristy sites, but just to be walking the path, that felt quite connecting for me. We actually came across a small shrine where we did a reading, and it was in the middle of all of these farmers' fields, and a group of locals came up to us and asked us what they were doing, because we did seem to attract quite a lot of attention, all in the blue robes. And we explained why we were there, and they said they were Buddhists as well, which came as quite a surprise. And at first we were like, are they just saying that to appease us? But no, they stood and chanted the refuges and precepts with us in Pali, and it was so just, touching. When you don't share a language with someone and you're able to do that in a connecting way, when it means so meaningful, it's great. It's a goosebumps moment. We went to Bodh Gaya, so that was the place where the Buddha gained enlightenment, sitting under the Bodhi tree for 49 days. The town itself was my favourite town, and it was it had a certain air to it of a lot more, I wouldn't say peaceful. I don't think I can say many places in India felt peaceful, but certainly compared to the places that we've been. The place where he was enlightened, so you have the Bodhi tree, you have the Mahabodhi temple, and you might picture it as being a wonderful, tranquil place. You would be wrong. So it's full of crowds. They're just immense. The level of busyness as you circumambulate the Mahabodhi temple, it's phenomenal. You have a sea of shaved heads, billowing ochre and maroon robes, monks and nuns, lots of beads. So all of the religious icon type people you would expect to see, but you've got them mixing in with tourists in jeans. So it's quite the melting pot of experiences. And you've got the megaphones, you've got the loudspeakers. So chanting comes to you through the speakers, which is novel. So the footprint of the Mahabodhi temple is actually quite small, but it is so tall. It's apparently 52 meters of sandstone, so it's quite impressive to look at. And we stayed there into the evening time because we had a point where we sat, meditated, chanted, did readings, and then went about our own busy way in the temples. And just looking up, it was lit in beautiful blue light, and the moon was right at the top. So if you followed it all the way to the top, the moon was just by the peak. It was beautiful. We came to meditate the next morning as well, and we sat underneath a Bodhi tree that was just next to the main Bodhi tree. And there was a lot of people there practicing, and you really do have to let go of any attachment to the idea that meditation needs to be in a quiet and calm place, because it's just not going to be. But at the end of the day, that we're all Buddhists and we're practicing together, and that's what you have to connect to in our own way, even if that way is through a megaphone. So after the Buddha became enlightened, he travelled to the deer park at Sarnath, where he met the 5 ascetics that had earlier deserted him. So the deer park, it's quite large, it's quite busy. I say busy because that was my impression of it before I'd actually been to Bodh Gaya, when that shifted slightly. There was a lot of people, Indians there, that seemed to want to take pictures of us. So it was a constant, can we have a selfie with you? Because we were a little bit novel in the blue robes, and they didn't get many experience of Westerners. While we were there, we visited a lot of temples that had been buried under the dust, and were only just being discovered, and sort of rebuilt some of them in places, so restored. And I thought, how can something so huge actually be covered in dust? But you get to find that there is a lot of dust in India, and I now fully appreciate when the Buddha talks about people with different levels of dust in their eyes. It has meaning. We travelled north from Sarnath to Shravasti, which at the time was the biggest town in the Ganges Plains. And that was when we had our experiences of the chaotic Indian roads. So I will never think of a traffic jam in England the same, or a tooting horn. It will be calm. So there's a constant barrage of horns beeping. At one point we were driving the wrong way down a dual carriageway, but that was normal, it was fine. There's cows in the road, there's cows lining the central reservation. But that was, oh yes, you get the people on sort of one little motorbike, but there's like a family of 5 on the motorbike going down the road, and also very few moments of people that seem to be carrying things that are far too large. Like, you know, the time where you go to IKEA and you buy a wardrobe and it doesn't fit, and you think, we'll get it in somehow. That was everywhere.
2 minutes.
So we moved on to Jetta's Grove, where the Buddha spent 25 rainy seasons teaching. I really did actually connect to that place, because that place was genuinely serene. We had a huge bag of dates from some Burmese monks that were about this big, and it took a long time to get through them. There was a Bodhi tree that was surrounded by prayer flags, and it was beautiful. It was said to be from the sapling from the Bodhi tree in Sri Lanka that came from the sapling of the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, so a direct descendant of the Bodhi tree. And in the Buddha's time, people would travel long distances to see him, and they'd often be disappointed that he wouldn't be there. So he said to his disciples, if we plant a Bodhi tree here, then the visitors can come and circumambulate, and it will be like being with me. And on reflection, that's exactly what we were doing. We'd come a long way to not be with the actual Buddha, but with the teaching and in spirit. So that was another moving moment. We went to Vulture's Peak, where the Buddha spent many rainy seasons, and where he taught the White Lotus Sutta and the Prajnaparamita. And it's a wonderful place. You can see for miles at the top when you've managed to navigate all the steps all the way to the precipice. There's huge boulders that look like a vulture's beak, which is where the name comes from. And you can really imagine the transcendental mysticism of all the teachings and what would come up. We went to Krishnagar, which was the site of the Buddha's parinirvana. And there's a temple in the centre, and it's beautiful grounds. We went there early in the morning, and the sun hadn't yet burned off all the mist, so it was quite atmospheric, and there was dew still all over the grass, and we just sat there and meditated, and it was really peaceful. It was opposite the two cell trees where the Buddha was said to have laid between when he died. So it was wonderful, the meditation, until the street dogs started coming for Kat and insisting on a fuss when she was not interested at all. But it was all part of the experience. As you say in India, nothing goes to plan. You have to just accept everything that comes. We went to the Canary Caves, which was actually at the start of the pilgrimage, and it's where the Buddha's relics are. So it's a series of temples and shrines and small residence rooms for monks that were carved into basalt rock 2,000 years ago. And when you see the scale of it, some of the huge statues that come out, it looks like something that you'd imagine from ancient Egypt. We're talking really tall statues, and a lot of the time it was Maitreya, so the Buddha of the future. We stood in the main shrine, and in the centre is where the Buddha's relics were, and we circumambulated it, and we chanted the mantra. And the acoustics in there were just phenomenal. Again, that was the first really moving moment for me, where we just heard our voices in unison. It had been silent until that point, and all the goosebumps came. And that, it was otherworldly. As I say, the focus was on the carvings of Maitreya around there. And we now look to the followings of Sangharakshita, which is our Buddha. Our teacher following the Buddha, and also Dr Ambedkar, who's made such an impact on Buddhism and on India. So I'll hand over to my next pilgrim.
I think Robin's next.
Robin.
Oh, is Robin next?
Robin wants to start.
It's India. Anything happens.
I've got a few pictures and drawings. You can just pass it around quickly. Right. So this wasn't expected, but I decided to make a little talk. I had a recent diagnosis for autism just before I went away, and also I've been looking after my mother, who died a few months before we went away. So I had quite a lot going on, and I was a bit apprehensive about the pilgrimage. But within a couple of days, I was transformed. I just felt happy, and I felt like a different person. Coming from England, I just felt, I do feel very, I don't know, different here, but I asked Maitri Dasa to put me on the pilgrim when I first joined the centre about 8 years ago, and he said, well, just hold on a bit, I think you're a bit too early. And I did agree with him. So he put me on the next one, and it was delayed a couple of years with COVID. But I found the whole thing very massively uplifted. And as I said, I felt a happiness I've never felt for many years. And I'm in a state now of going forward. I'm selling my house, and I'm going to continue my travels. I do, as an autistic person, you're either usually very good with words or good with visually, and I'm quite good with drawing. So within a couple of days, I'd started drawing again. I hadn't drawn for months, and that was how I could express my feelings. But I joined the centre here about 8 years ago, and that's been transformative in itself. It's full of wonderful, nice, kind people, and which is not how it is outside. In India, I just felt I just felt the people were more friendly. On a whole, I didn't feel threatened. I just felt relaxed. I just felt all the hustle and bustle in England, the rushing and tearing. It just, I find the whole thing quite difficult. But as I say, the pilgrimage gave me enormous. I just loved every time someone asked me, "Well, how are you doing?" I just said I felt wonderful. And as I said, you can't define happiness, but I just felt extremely happy. And it's something that I'm going to continue. I'm going to sell my property. I'm going to simplify my life. And I'm 71 now. And I just want to enjoy my last few years. And if I'm happy, I want to spread that happiness to other people. It's so easy to go into a kind of rut. But the pilgrimage was wonderful. There was about 20 different people, and there was an enormous bond and feeling. And even though, I mean, at one stage everything was delayed, one train was delayed about 17 hours, but it just seemed to bring us a lot closer. And yet you get a train being delayed 10 minutes and people go mad. Yeah, it was just, it was just wonderful. I mean, I don't think it's everybody's cup of tea, but someone said to me, I went to Thailand about 8 years ago, and he said, "You'll love it." And it's just like going back 100 years. I don't know, the Asian culture just suits me, so I am thinking of spending more time there. So I don't know what's going to happen next, but as I say, I don't want to go back to my old ways, and I just want to live just to be happy, to be honest. I mean, there is a lot of suffering in life, as we know, but I think you can, you know, with the help of Buddhism, rise above it, and that's it, really. Okay.
Well, we can't get much higher recommendation for going on a pilgrimage than that. Thank you so much, Robin. It was a delight to spend time with you and with everybody. Everybody, you do become a family. Oh, depending on what your family is actually like. Not like mine, that's for sure. Oh, anyway, so we landed in Mumbai and wiggled our way to Calcutta over the period of a month, 4,000 kilometers. And people keep asking me, you know, what was it like? What was the journey like? What's India like? And I don't know what to say. I really don't about that country. It's beautiful, it's magical, it's colourful, it's exciting. The roads, as Chrissy alluded to, I've got a 20-minute comic monologue about those, which I'll give another time. Hopefully, at some point, we'll be able to do another session like this, where we talk just about the pilgrimage. But, you know, this is to focus really on the work of Dr. Ambedkar and what he means to us and what changes he's brought about in India. So India, yeah, it's wonderful, beautiful, magical. There are fabulous examples of highly skilled art and architecture, glimpses of a highly inspired spirituality. They have cutting-edge IT technology. There's a space program. They have nuclear weapons. They have everything. And with a population of 1.4 billion people, India is now one of the most powerful nations on this planet. But it's also unbelievably squalid, filthy, chaotic, and corrupt. Wherever we went, on the trains, the streets, roadside chai stalls, right up to the entrances, and actually within the Buddhist holy sites, the most sacred of our monuments, there are people begging, men, women, little children, women with babies, old people, people with amputated and twisted limbs, everywhere you go. Young people, old people, children learning from their parents how to beg. Hundreds of, you will personally see hundreds of them, even thousands. On a trip that we did, we probably saw thousands of people, all with their hands out, please, madam, sir, please, hello, please, all the time. There are 250 million, that's 250 million people, give or take, of the Dalit or scheduled class members, people who are identified with that caste. And that's a lot of people. And they live in conditions of discrimination, deprivation and humiliation, which are unimaginable here. And this is, as Padmavajra has said, due to the deeply entrenched caste system. And in spite of India's constitution and contemporary law, it's not only tolerated but perpetuated. And you can give these people anything. You can give them everything you've got and it won't make a bit of difference, because their degradation is an accepted way of living and is ingrained into their mentality. Now we have seen one of the most poignant and moving images that I saw was when we visited a stupa near Bodh Gaya dedicated to Sujata. And if you don't know who she was, she brought milk and rice to the Buddha and helped to restore his health when his austerities had he'd nearly starved to death. And she helped him to restore his health. And there's a big stupa outside the little village of Senanigrama, which is quite close to Bodh Gaya. And as with many of these monuments, they're in some parkland and there's fencing all around it. And people are outside this fencing. And you can't see their faces or their bodies very clearly because of the railings. And they've just got their arms all the time through this fencing, begging, calling to you as you're paying your respects to the monument, to the stupa, or circumambulating, just begging all the time. And what it said to me, I sat there and just sat with what they were doing and where I was. And I realized actually this was a metaphor, because those railings aren't real. Metaphorically, they're a state of mind. This stupa represents the answer to that suffering that these people are in, the real answer to that suffering. Not any money you can give them, but the Dharma that stupa represents, and the path of the Buddha. And that fencing that they're standing outside with their arms reaching through in want, it's not real. It's a barrier within their minds. And this is what Dr. Ambedkar, as Padmavajra said, you have to change people's minds, and there, right in front of them, is the answer. And we saw this we saw this answer in operation in Mumbai. We saw it in Nagpur, even in Sarnath. A little story. You see groups of pilgrims going around, and there was a group of white-clad pilgrims by a statue of the Buddha that is 80 foot tall. Magnificent piece in Sarnath. And as quite often is the case, people wanted to take selfies with you. Well, I couldn't do that straight away, so I said I'd go back to them later, and I did. And as usual, they were asking me where I come from, England. So I started asking them where they'd come from as well. And what school are you with? And I said Triratna. And then I said Sangharakshita. And then I looked and I said Sangharakshita Ambedkar. Well, like that. And that they understood. And in that moment, they were Ambedkarite Buddhists. The joy and delight on their faces of meeting a European Buddhist who knew the name of Dr. Ambedkar, their Bodhisattva. And it was just a delight to meet those people and make that connection with them. So, yeah, it's okay. I'll have to be really quick. I won't go through Dr. Ambedkar's biography, which I've got here, because Padmavajra's done a wonderful job of doing that. But we did go to the Diksha Bhumi in Nagpur, and we stood in that parkland where Dr. Ambedkar was converted to Buddhism himself, and then turned around and converted 400,000 other white-clad people, Dalits who'd begged, borrowed, hopefully not stolen, to get those white clothes and get themselves to Nagpur for that event. And then 6 weeks later, he died. And this is why our movement is connected so much to Dr. Ambedkar and his work. Because without Sangharakshita's having an inspiration, he was in Mumbai and he was inspired to come to Nagpur. He didn't understand why, but he just did it. And he was there in the moment, and he took over what Dr. Ambedkar was doing. This was a nascent, just at the beginnings, movement for the restoration of Buddhism. If he hadn't been there, if he hadn't been able to speak to those people at that time, it would have died. And we stayed at the university in Nagpur, where there are hundreds of students studying Buddhism. We visited the projects in Nagpur, where young people and adults are given an education in English, in IT, help to set up cooperatives. And in Nalanda, I mean, you can think there are tens of millions of Buddhists now in India, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to 1.4 billion. And you can say to yourself, but you know, come on, there's so much there. What good is this doing? It's such a tiny little drop. But the thing is, we also visited Nalanda University, where we stood on you can stand on the dais where Shantideva stood or sat and gave his tea and gave the monks the Bodhicharyavatara, in which he says, the Dharma, the good, this good, the true, the beautiful Dharma is like a flash of lightning in the eternal vast darkness. And where would we be without that flash of light? And we have to be a part of that flash of light. And if you go to Bodh Gaya and you sit by a Tibetan puja, sit really close to it, and they crack those drums, my God, that is, I'm sorry. That is a thunderbolt straight through you. You feel it as a thunderbolt straight through you. And that is the voice of the Dharma. So, I mean, this is what Dr. Ambedkar brought about. This is what he inspired in that country. And if you want to support it, you can make donations. You can go on a Karuna appeal. Go and visit the projects there. Go on a pilgrimage. Go and see it. Make connections. Because we need that in this world. And those people who are begging on the steps of Rajgir, Vulture's Peak, outside the monuments, and Bodh Gaya, on the streets of Bodh Gaya, they need it. Thank you.
Namo Buddhaya, Jai Bhim. So I was actually on a different pilgrimage to the rest of the pilgrims here. I went with Kshantikara from Adhisthana and Suryanaga, the young Buddhists. And I'm mainly going to talk about the convention, the International Buddhist Youth Convention that was held at Nagaloka in Nagpur. Yeah, it's so funny. In the run up to it, I was so busy trying to finish my masters, I completely forgot about the convention. And after being on a flight and arriving there, I was like, oh yeah, I've got a week in Nagpur first before going off to all these Buddhist sites. And it's so beautiful at Nagaloka. It's just incredible, and they've got this huge walk-in Buddha, and I arrived at night time and I could just see the shadow of it. So it was great waking up to that. And yeah, and then the day after, all of the young Indian Buddhists started to arrive, and they just brought an incredible energy with them. Yeah, they were so inspiring. So I think there's three main things that I want to talk about that I learned from being around like young Indian Buddhists, and those are courage, positive emotion, and generosity. So yeah, many people that I spoke to whilst I was there had like made a really difficult decision to convert to Buddhism. All their families, like their parents, grandparents, some of their grandparents were at the Diksha Bhumi. And I think in India, they may have a different kind of concept of youth. Obviously, we have maybe like under 35s, like things here. There were people that were probably in their 50s that came to this youth convention. And it was really interesting. And sometimes they were less educated than some of the younger people, but they still made so much of an effort to like get involved. So in one of my discussion groups, there was a man called Jitender, and he could hardly speak a word of English, and everything that was said in the discussion group had to be translated. But I felt like we still built up a really good connection, and we'd always give each other eye contact, and like we'd both be nodding even though we didn't know what each other was saying. and he had somebody translate for him that he'd made the decision to convert, and he managed to convert his 85-year-old mother. And I just thought that was amazing. Like, she'd been Hindu her whole life. And he talked about his nephew who would spend 2 hours reading the Bhagavad Gita every day, and he'd managed to convert him and then bring him along, and he was actually at the convention as well. And I just found that really inspiring, because he was saying how many obstacles that he and his family had faced, like the discrimination. He was from like a scheduled caste background, and you could just really see how much it meant to him. It was his first time kind of being on a sort of retreat kind of like environment. So yeah, I guess that was like the first bit of courage that I saw, but it was everywhere. They were all so courageous and so driven. And then the second thing, the positive emotion. I mean, as you can imagine, we arrived all jet lagged and tired and had like heat stroke and everything, and we just wanted to sleep a lot of the time. And then it was just so hard to be grumpy around them. They were just so positive. We kind of just threw ourselves into it and started socializing. For some people, it was like the only week off that they got from work or study, like in the whole year. So they were really making the most of it. And that meant that they went to everything that was on the schedule. And when I say it was a busy schedule, there was no breaks, not even time for journaling or reading or anything like that. And a lot of the time they were being kept up in their dorm rooms till about 3 a.m. because people were singing in the next bunk, and they were just like, oh, I'm just going to get up and join in. And then they'd still get up at 6:30 and go to meditation, and I just thought, wow, like they're really dedicated. And so, yeah, the positivity was contagious. And a lot of us, when we had our little group check-in every day, and Shantikara just said, just lean into your practice. Like, you're tired, you're grumpy, whatever, but just lean into it. And we did. And by the end of it, it was just the norm. You just were tired and you just go to everything and you join in with the singing and the dancing and the games, and you just built such great friendships. And then I just want to say how generous they were. They were some of the most generous people I've ever met. They completely went out of their way to make us feel comfortable and welcome, including putting less spice in the curries so that we could enjoy the food. Even though it meant not, they might not have enjoyed it. We heard a few people say, oh, this is bland. And also, sometimes the team had to make late night trips to the shop just to get us some toilet roll. We were so spoiled. I made a friend there called Shubham, and he bought me this beautiful sari. So I said that I would wear it today. And I think it just shows as well that, like, we had like really good conversation and built a really good friendship. And he actually flew all the way from Pune to Delhi, which is like 900 miles, just to say goodbye because he didn't get a chance to say it at the convention. And I just thought that's incredible. Like, I don't think we'd think of doing that here for somebody that you've only known for a few days. So yeah, it's just the generosity is great. And I guess I want to tie all of this to Dr. Ambedkar and just say that a lot of these qualities were inspired by him. I did ask a few of my new like Indian friends what Dr. Ambedkar means to them, and not many people got back to me in time because, you know, it's typical Indian style. Like they all left it till the last minute. But one of them did say that he's the most influential person in his life, and that they have Buddhism because of Dr. Ambedkar and his dedication to the Dhamma Revolution. And they used the quote, we are because he was. And I just think it's so beautiful. And I didn't know that much about Dr. Ambedkar before going to India. And I learned so much, and I found his story so interesting. And the fact that he taught himself to write with his left hand so that if anything ever happened to his right hand, he could keep going for the movement. Just little things like that. It's just incredible. And I know like a lot of Indian people really do see him, well, Indian Buddhists see him as a bodhisattva. And some of the things he did, like, part of me doesn't doubt that really. And I guess going on to the pilgrimage after the convention, I kind of took that thread of inspiration with me. One thing Dr. Ambedkar said is, you cannot transform the world unless you transform your own mind. And I spent a lot of the pilgrimage working with that and being in India and in the midst of all the chaos. And I mean, if Dawn touched on like the whole Nepal saga, and my pilgrimage group did go to Nepal, and we spent 18 hours stuck at the border because our visas got messed up. And I don't regret it because Lumbini was incredible, and seeing the birthplace of the Buddha. And there was lots of other things that happened. You know, we were in a bus accident. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but that was because there's a cow in the road, and there's so many things happened. And I really kind of used my practice to help ground myself in those moments, and kind of took this, you know, transforming my mind. And then when it came to people begging, you know, really using creativity to respond. So sometimes little kids would come, and instead of just kind of feeling really uncomfortable and not knowing what to say, I would just play with them and pull funny faces and try and engage with them in other ways, because I could tell that they didn't really want to be begging. They just wanted to play. And there was just lots of different ways that I was able to kind of practice the Dharma in India, things that I wouldn't have known if I'd have never gone there, because I didn't know that I could push myself to those limits. And having some of the Indian team with us helped keep that positivity alive. You know, we'd be on the bus for hours and things would go wrong, and we'd be starving because we'd not stopped. We couldn't find anywhere to stop off and eat. And we'd just start singing on the bus and playing games. And the team, they were just great. You know, we had a team of cooks that, like, we arrived really late somewhere. I think it was like 1:30 in the morning. And they were willing to just cook a full meal. And we were all just like, it's fine. Like, and they did. They cooked for us. They were just so generous and kind, and they just couldn't do enough for us. So yeah, I guess, I don't know how much time I've got, but all I'll say is that it was an incredible experience. It's really hard to put it all into words, but if you ever get the chance to go on a pilgrimage, do it. And if you can go to the convention, do it. They want more people to go, and I feel like I've made tons of friends. They all want me to go visit them and meet their families, and it's great. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
I'm so happy that you're all getting a taste of, well, the Sangha in India, because what I've received from friends I've made in the Indian Sangha has just been above and beyond what I could have imagined. And I'm really compelled, well, the only way I can really kind of receive what I've been given is to change my life. To live an ever more kind and generous life. So part of me honouring what I've received is hopefully to share a few stories of, really some of the incredible friends that I've made. We started off our pilgrimage properly standing in Nagaloka behind this unique statue of the Buddha walking, striding out. And Maitri Dasa gave, as he is apt to doing, a short beautiful speech. So about following in the footsteps of the Buddha, visiting these sacred sites, but not stopping there in the past, carrying the Dharma forward in our lives. And then Mani Dhamma carried on, and he was talking, why is it the Buddha Maitreya, the Buddha of the future, that they chose to have in the shrine room at Nagaloka? Well, he explained that when Dr Ambedkar revived Buddhism, there wasn't any living Buddhist tradition in India. There was a gap. So there was no past to look to, and there was only a future to look forward to. And just like Maitreya represents, that future is a future of love. So that was the vision that we started off with, and that is really the vision of the Sangha in India. It became clear to me, as Phoebe kind of gives you a sense of the less kind of enthusiastic sort of sea of faces that we were surrounded with, all through our trip, and especially with meeting the young people. And I can see actually it's not easy for a young person to understand what Buddhism really is, because, as we heard, just 6 weeks after the mass conversion, Dr. Ambedkar had died. He didn't have much time to explain what it really meant to be a Buddhist. So the people who I met who really do have, a grasp of the Dharma, they shine like diamonds in a sort of, my friends told me there are as many Buddhist organizations in India as there are Buddhists. I think that's not too much of an exaggeration. There'll be, probably hundreds of thousands, if not more, of Buddhists, this coming Friday, the 14th of April, celebrating Ambedkar Jayanti. But my good friend Dikshant showed me in his village, here's the little shrine. On Friday, it will be full of people. But the rest of the year, they don't use it. People don't really know how to learn a daily practice of Buddhism. But I can see that inside Triratna, people really do understand. And I can see what a difference it makes. So my friend Santosh, he grew up in Bihar, one of the most sort of backward states of India. And his first experience of casteism, because he comes from a scheduled caste background, was actually when he was at university, when one of the professors, who was a Brahmin, decided to fail all of the lower caste students on that particular exam. And Santosh, he had the courage, he had the confidence that comes from being a Buddhist, being a follower of Dr. Ambedkar. And he challenged this professor. Very strongly, actually. I won't tell you what he said to this man, but it was enough that professor actually ran to the dean of the department. But Santosh knew the dean of the department. He's a very friendly man. And he arranged to get the paper remarked, and he passed. He passed his exam. He got his master's in law. Because he challenged the professor, he was able to proceed. But there were 5 other people on his course who also came from a lower caste background, who were also failed on that exam. And they didn't challenge. They didn't have the thought, they didn't have the courage to challenge that person. And they just went home empty-handed. All of the money for that education was wasted. And I just think that is the difference, that confidence, that uprightness, that dignity, that transformation of consciousness has. Laws aren't enough. You need something that comes from inside. I've seen that again and again, like, in Maharashtra. I've got, friends, like, invited into the houses. You go into the house and, their parents may have very little English, but they've put so much effort into educating their children. And, my peers, they're just incredible English, incredibly well educated. My friend Roselle, she's applying to come and study in England. And for someone of her background to be able to do that is almost unthinkable. But she's part of a community that provide the support that makes that possible. And even then, she recognizes that just education isn't enough. You know, she knows what a challenge it's going to be potentially to come to England and study here. And so she wants to become a Dhamma Mitra, a Mitra within the Sangha, because she recognizes that, well, not only education, but I need to educate myself in how to live well, how to have the courage and confidence to go beyond what her parents and maybe anyone in her family has ever done before. She took me out, her and a couple of her friends who are students at Nagaloka, and a few other friends and neighbours, all got into a small car and drove for a couple of hours. And they said, oh, we're going to do some excavations. So we visited a site which is, just travelled down a rough country track between rice fields, and there's a kind of mound in some woods. And they said, this is an unexcavated stupa from the time of Ashoka. And it's possible that this has the remains of the Buddha in it, but nobody has come here to excavate this place. Nobody wants to do that. But we're coming here, we're coming to pay homage because we are Buddhists now, we're followers of Dr Ambedkar, and we're carrying out this work of reviving Buddhism in India today. So in 50 years' time, I don't know if that will be a famous World Heritage Site or just a picnic spot. But there are young people today who are carrying out this revival of Buddhism in the land where it was born. I just think that's incredibly inspiring. I couldn't thank them enough for what they'd shown me, the hospitality, the generosity, the friendship. And they said, Edward, just stop. Don't say thank you, it's rude. You're part of our family. If you want to thank us, just say, I love you all. So it's as simple as that, really. That's the life they're living. And it's amazing. It's amazing the way that the Sangha is changing the world. Yeah.
We fell over a pilgrim, that wouldn't have been good. Well, just thank you so much. I found that really moving. Thank you to all our speakers. So thank you to Edward, who started us off and finished so well. It was beautiful. Really great to hear from you, Phoebe, particularly your experience with the young people. Really great to hear from you, Sean, about how you saw Ambedkar's principles in action in India. And I'm sure I forgot somebody. Dawn, yeah, that was such really lovely. And Robin, thank you both very much. Really great to hear from you, Dawn, about all the different places you visited and your experiences there. And just lovely to hear you, Robin, just speaking so openly from your heart about how you felt in India and how it's changed you. So thank you very much to all of you.